Hello and welcome back to another video. My name is CJ the Populist New Yorker, and today we're going to be taking a look at the 2021 Virginia gubernatorial election. So like the state of New Jersey, Virginia elects its governors in off years, which is really, these are really the two only races to really be focused on, and New Jersey is not really going to be an exciting race to watch, considering Governor Murphy's going to have no problem winning re-election against any Republican they put up against him. So this is really the only somewhat competitive race that is going to be happening in November. And I say somewhat competitive, I should just say straight up competitive, because after the Republican convention, their nominee seems to be fairly strong. The Republican nominee, Glenn Youngkin, to me anyway, seems like the perfect type of Republican to run in the state. And I think he might be, if any Republican were to do it, the first Republican to win statewide office since 2009 in the state. And we'll get into why that could be a little bit later on in the video. But let's take a look at the primary, of course. On the Democrats, of course, their primary isn't until June. However, the nominee is basically certain. It's going to be Terry McAuliffe. All the polls, now again, the last poll was conducted in April. But so far, all the news points to Terry McAuliffe winning overwhelmingly in the primary. I wouldn't be surprised if he got 70% of the vote or something even higher than that. He was always the favorite from the get-go because he was the former governor before Ralph Northam from 2014 to 2018. And fairly well liked. I mean, they liked him enough to elect another Democrat in 2017. So that certainly was in his favor. And bodes well for him going into this election. Of course, Virginia, if we just look at the latest election results, Virginia is certainly a state Democrats do very well in. It's a likely Democratic state. It's on the verge of being a safe Democratic state, although I wouldn't say it's there yet. You'd have to give it probably another decade, and that's being a little generous to the Republicans. I'd say probably within 6 years, based on current trends. Virginia is going to be safe Democratic, and what I mean by that is Democrats winning by around 10 to 12 points in every election, kind of like in a state like Illinois, although that's a little bit more safe. More on par with a state like Oregon or Washington, perhaps. But if we just look at the 2020 results real quick, the main population centers are here in Northern Virginia in places like Fairfax County, Prince William, Loudoun County. And of course we have the Richmond metro area, so Hanover County, Richmond, Chesterfield, Henrico County, and of course Hampton Roads, which is Norfolk, Virginia Beach, Newport News, things like cities like that. And of course you've got little blue pockets here in the western part of the state, but it's mainly focused here on the eastern part of the state. And a lot of former Republican strongholds are now blue, or at least were blue back in November. Virginia Beach, which is actually the largest city in the state of Virginia, because Virginia Beach is actually an independent city. It's kind of a weird system they have in Virginia where they have counties and then they have independent cities. I don't really understand it too much. But from what I understand, the cities basically have autonomy, kind of like counties or something. But effectively, a lot of the former Republican strongholds, Chesterfield County, Stafford County, Virginia Beach, Lynchburg, they've all gone for Joe Biden this time around. And even smaller former Republican counties like James City County, which was red back in 2016, was red in 2017 as well. Places, counties like this, and even places like Essex County, getting fairly close. Really goes to show you that the Republicans seem to be losing the state more and more as time goes on. I think it is something we probably would have seen anyway. I mean, given that the fact that Virginia was blue, basically since 2008, it hasn't really gone back. But I think the election of Donald Trump in particular really accelerated this blue trend, particularly in the suburbs, mostly as a rebuke and a check on the former president. Because when you look at other statewide races, they are closer. I mean, if we look at the last statewide races in Virginia, the governor's race was a pretty solid victory for Ralph Northam, about 9 points. But the lieutenant governor's race, on the other hand, was not. The attorney general's race was somewhere in the middle, but the lieutenant governor's race This is only a margin of 5.4% compared to 8.9, effectively 9 points. So again, Ed Gillespie, the Republican nominee, he was the nominee in 2014. He was up against Senator Mark Warner, and he almost pulled an upset. However, he fell short. He fell short in a lot of these southwestern counties in Virginia. But this is the last time a Republican really got super, super close to actually winning a statewide race or a federal race in the state of Virginia. If you look at the areas where Gillespie performed really well, he performed well in Northern Virginia. He got 40% in Fairfax County, 47% in Prince William, and he won Loudoun County. Again, 2014 was only 7 years ago. If we look back just to last November, Loudoun County, 61-36, Prince William, 62-35, Fairfax, 70 to 28%. A monumental shift in favor of the Democrats in a very short time. Now, given this was a red year, this was a year where Republicans were doing very well across the rest of the country, and Virginia, again, Mark Warner was a fairly popular senator. I believe, I could be wrong about that. At the time, I believe he was fairly popular. He won by around 30 points back in 2008. And he was a fairly successful governor in the early 2000s. But again, places like Henrico County, Ed Gillespie was able to keep these blue areas much closer than what we see today. Of course, the reason he lost, he did very well in Northern Virginia. That wasn't his problem. It was down here. It was in the southwestern part of the state. It just wasn't red enough for a Republican to actually win here. So unfortunately for Republicans, they lost this race because of that. Possibly the Robert Sarvis, who I think was a libertarian, at least he was a libertarian in 2013. He might have been a factor, although Mark Warner winning by 0.8, it would really be a stretch to say that even if he was out of the race, that Ed Gillespie would have won. But his 2017 campaign, Ed Gillespie had to toe a fine line between being a pro-Trump Republican and being a moderate Republican that could appeal to people in Northern Virginia. Ed Gillespie, before the 2017 campaign was a very Bushite Republican. He worked for George W. Bush in the past. And he originally had appeal in Northern Virginia. And he did better than Donald Trump did in 2016 in Northern Virginia. But Ralph Northam just did so much better than Hillary Clinton, it massively offset any gains. And of course, Ed Gillespie got 45% of the vote. Trump just got 44.4%. So he only overperformed Trump by a small amount. But again, the lieutenant governor's race was a lot closer. This was a blue wave year in Virginia. Democrats almost captured both houses of government. They came short, I think, 1 or 2 seats in the House of Delegates and the state Senate. They took it in 2019. But in 2017, the state went from effectively a supermajority Republican legislature to essentially almost a tied legislature with a narrow Republican majority. And that really says something, because this lieutenant governor's race, getting 47% of the vote when the top of the ticket is only getting 45, really says a lot, possibly about the candidate, but also about the state of Virginia. I think Virginia is still a Democratic state, but I think more of the aversion to Republicans in Virginia isn't really necessarily because they're Republicans. It's because they're more right-wing or Trumpian Republicans. Like, I feel like moderate Republicans in Virginia obviously would have a much easier time. And that, of course, brings me to the nominee that the Republicans have actually put up, Glenn Youngkin. Glenn Youngkin has run, as far as I could tell, a very positive, optimistic campaign focused mainly on economic growth. Things like putting Virginia back to work, opening schools, things like that. Things the vast majority of people can get behind. And even though he was endorsed by Donald Trump, you could tell that he doesn't really tout that endorsement in most circumstances, because naturally touting an endorsement of Trump in a state he lost by 10 points is a very bad idea. So he doesn't do that. And I think that's smart because, Ed Gillespie tried to distance himself from Trump, but the entire nation was watching that race very closely because Especially like things like Charlottesville certainly helped Democrats. But also the fact that Trump was directly, intervening in the race, tweeting about the race. There was constant attention on it. Trump, ever since his effective ban off the internet, has really become. He's still a big figure in the Republican Party, but his influence is certainly fading. I mean, it's very different to not see Donald Trump on Twitter or Instagram or any other social media site every single day. The less of a factor he is, I think the more it helps the Virginia GOP in particular, which is on the verge of, is an endangered party in the state of Virginia, on the verge of basically irrelevancy. But I think Glenn Youngkin would be the type of Republican to buck that trend. I think he's conservative enough to get the vast majority of Republicans behind him, and I think he's also moderate enough to get enough independents to win in November. Now, I still think this race is lean Democratic. I would put Glenn Youngkin's chances of winning as of right now, based on no polling, at around 20%. Which isn't terrible, but obviously Terry McAuliffe has a gigantic advantage. Terry McAuliffe being the former governor who won during a red wave year in the state of Virginia in 2013. He won against Ken Cuccinelli by about 2.5 points. Ken Cuccinelli was the incumbent Attorney General of Virginia. The Attorney General to Republican governor at the time, Rob McDonnell, who was elected, I believe, by nearly 20 points back in 2009. He won almost every county in the state of Virginia and was fairly popular most of his term, or at least above water, certainly. And this was certainly a shift. Some people blame Robert Sarvis, the Libertarian, for taking votes away from Ken Cuccinelli. And I think he took votes away from both parties. He probably took away from Ken Cuccinelli more, but I think even despite that factor, Ken Cuccinelli probably would have lost based on the results of the other races. The lieutenant governor's race went Democratic, and so did the attorney general. The attorney general race was very, 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 very close. I think it was only a few hundred votes difference, but nonetheless, it still went Democratic. So again, Virginia bucked the trend in the rest of the state, and bucked the trend in particular that Virginia has had since the 1970s, in which it elects the party, the opposite of the party that's in power in Washington. So Obama being the president, Terry McAuliffe getting elected was a very new thing for the state of Virginia. Normally it was almost a reactionary state in the sense that it would elect the opposite party as governor, as a way to kind of balance out national and statewide politics. So the reason I point this out is because Terry McAuliffe is certainly a force to be reckoned with for the Republicans. They have a very uphill battle winning the state of Virginia. And I do think it's worth it for them, in all honesty. Not only would it be able to steer Virginia in a different direction from their point of view, which would be very beneficial, but also, I think he has a big advantage being the former governor, also being endorsed by the current governor, Ralph Northam, which I believe is on his list of endorsements. Yeah, the current governor, Ralph Northam, endorsed Terry McAuliffe. And as far as I know, Ralph Northam has fairly good marks by Virginians. Make no mistake of it, Virginia is a blue state, but it's not a safe blue state yet. And, in comparison to a state like Colorado, again, if we just look at 2016 real quick, Virginia voted more Democratic than the state of Colorado in 2016. Colorado going around 4 points in favor of Hillary, Virginia 5, to 2020 going 10 points in favor of Biden, to nearly 13.5 points in Colorado. So Colorado has certainly had a much farther shift to the left. Virginia seems to be a little bit more grounded in the center, although obviously with each passing year, it's still shifting more and more left-wing. Particularly the last 2 years, Virginia's had a significant amount of left-wing victories, whether it's legalizing marijuana, abolishing the death penalty, passing certain gun control laws. Virginia's certainly not like the rest of the South anymore. It's a very different state. And Democrats, by most metrics, are probably going to continue that streak. Again, the only way they don't is if a somewhat decent candidate like Glenn Youngkin actually is able to pull an upset. And again, if we look back at his primary, Glenn Youngkin's primary was up against a woman named Amanda Chase, who was a very, very right-wing, very, very pro-Trump Republican. The Republicans were smart, I guess, electorally speaking, in that they did a convention instead of a direct primary. Amanda Chase being a super MAGA pro-Trump Republican, kind of akin to a Marjorie Taylor Greene or Lauren Boebert, which, of course, you could just look at 2018 when Virginia nominated Corey Stewart, a similar type of Republican. He lost by 17 points. So that certainly doesn't fly in this state. I think, the convention selecting Glenn Youngkin as the nominee was certainly the smartest move by the Virginia GOP, and really their only chance to actually win a statewide race. I guess if Virginia were to go red, it would be in November, considering that Joe Biden is in the presidency and that there still is a decent amount of energy from Republicans due to things like the recent gun control passed in Virginia, probably some COVID-19 stuff as well, but I think that's more and more becoming just less of a factor. But really just to get a breath of fresh air, I suppose, from eight years of one-party rule in the executive branch. But again, we still have months to go before this race actually occurs, so I won't really be doing my final verdict on the Virginia governor's race until October or probably early November, and by then we're certainly going to have decent polling, I would hope. Right now we have no polling, so I can only go off the past trends, the current trends, and just analyzing the candidates and how they've kind of been running their campaigns. And, my current prediction as it stands is Terry McAuliffe getting 51.2% or somewhere in that ballpark. I just kind of did the specific numbers just to throw it out there because we don't have any actual polling. Glenn Youngkin getting 47.5%, which I certainly think is possible based on the fact that, again, in 2017, a blue wave year, a Republican lieutenant governor candidate was able to get around 47%. I certainly think the statewide Republicans are going to do better than they did in 2017. I think Virginia will snap back to the right, but really the question is by how much. I don't think it's going to be a blue year in Virginia by any means, just because of the fact that Biden is in the presidency, and that is naturally going to limit the momentum of Democratic voters to get out. And again, a candidate like Youngkin isn't really a right-wing, ultra-conservative like Amanda Chase, running a very moderate campaign, mostly focused on the economy. I think he's certainly electable, and again, I put him at around a 20% chance to win, which I think is very high considering, Virginia is a likely Democratic state. So, again, we'll see, but this is my prediction as it stands right now. And obviously, polling data will change that, and I'll probably do a follow-up video in the fall actually doing my final prediction on the race once we actually have good polling. But anyway, guys, thank you all for watching this video. Please leave a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, comment down below, share this video so we can expand the audience on this channel, and I hope to see you in the next one.